1949 would prove to be a crucial year in the Cold War. The United States has atomic weapons, and Joseph Stalin desperately wants one. In order to win the Cold War, the Soviet Union must become an atomic power to match the United States. Joseph Stalin orders spies into the US military. These spies successfully steal the plans to build an atomic bomb. And so in 1949, the Soviet Union becomes an atomic power when it test detonates its own atomic bomb. This is the beginning of the arms race. Once the Soviets had the bomb, the nuclear age had begun. The United States and the Soviet Union were the world's two nuclear superpowers. Throughout the arms race, the United States and the Soviet Union stockpile nuclear arms in order to top each other. Throughout the course of the 4 decades of the Cold War, these two superpowers would stockpile thousands of nuclear weapons. The negligence and irresponsibility of stockpiling such destructive weapons is lost on the world's two superpowers in their quest for power and influence around the globe. And it places the world in a very dangerous situation.
The massive stockpiling of weapons brought about the policy of brinkmanship. Brinkmanship was a Cold War policy that threatened all-out nuclear war in order to deter the Soviets. Deterrence is a defensive policy, where if we threaten to use our weapons, the Soviets wouldn't want to use theirs.
One of the most symbolic representations of the Cold War was the competition between the USSR and the USA as they raced each other into space. How did this space race get started? And how did it end? On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets became the first nation to launch an artificial satellite into orbit around the planet. This satellite, a large metal sphere about the size of a beach ball, was known as Sputnik 1. With the successful launch of Sputnik, the space race had begun. America quickly responded. Within 4 months, the first U.S. satellite, Explorer 1, achieved orbit around the Earth. However, the U.S. had always thought of itself as the leader in rocket development and space technology. Therefore, the fact that the Soviets had achieved the feat first greatly disturbed many Americans. In fact, many citizens panicked, viewing this as proof that the American education system was far behind that of the Soviets. School curriculum was carefully examined, placing a stronger emphasis on science and mathematics courses. The following year, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, was created to help the United States more effectively achieve its goals in space. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a bold announcement that the United States would make it a goal to land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Finally, in 1969, the Apollo 11 mission saw the United States win the race to the moon.
After World War II, Americans were fearful that the communists had infiltrated America. The Soviets had come to dominate Eastern Europe with the communist bloc. China and North Korea had fallen to communism rather easily. And most of all, the Soviets had also developed an atomic bomb by stealing United States secrets. Americans were outraged that the Soviets had put spies in the US State Department and stolen our secrets. All of these things lead to McCarthyism. Headed by Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy, McCarthyism was a witch hunt to root out suspected communists in America by accusing them without hard evidence.
Today, the most dangerous enemy agent is not so much concerned with the secret information about weapons as he is with infiltrating the necessary departments of the government and shaping and controlling the actions of our nation.
Millions of Americans were investigated, and their reputations were ruined. And once investigated, they were forced to take loyalty oaths. Americans' civil liberties were violated. The freedom of speech was trampled, and Americans were afraid to speak out due to paranoia.
By 1947, communist paranoia in the United States government ran rampant. In response,
President Truman and Congress created two agencies to investigate. The first was the Loyalty Review Board. It investigated the backgrounds of federal employees for any suspicious pasts. 3,000 Americans were fired or forced to resign from their government positions without any hard evidence to convict them, because they were deemed risks to national security. The president also authorized HUAC. HUAC was the House Un-American Activities Committee, and this left the biggest impact on McCarthyism. HUAC made itself famous by going after communist subversion in the film industry. It believed that communists in Hollywood were sneaking propaganda into movies. HUAC subpoenaed 43 different witnesses from the film industry, or called them in to testify before Congress on this matter. 33 of these witnesses were actors, writers, directors, and producers who were friendly to the committee and gave testimony freely. However, 10 of the witnesses refused to testify before Congress because they felt that their rights were being violated. This group became known as the Hollywood 10, and they were put in jail for ignoring orders of Congress.
Adding to the communist paranoia were two cases of Soviet spies in the United States. The first case was Alger Hiss. In 1948, Hiss was arrested on suspicion of stealing government documents for the Soviets. Unable to charge him with spying, Hiss is convicted of perjury, or lying under oath, and he was imprisoned. The probe into Alger Hiss was led by Richard Nixon. This case boosted Nixon into national fame. Another case is with Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. They were convicted of giving the Soviets U.S. atomic plans. These Jewish American citizens were then executed by electric chair.
But by the early 1950s, McCarthyism was losing steam, and Americans were growing tired of the paranoia. In 1954, Joseph McCarthy claimed to have the names of 200 Soviet spies in the U.S. State Department. He made wild accusations on television and harassed and bullied witnesses before Congress. The American public turned on Joseph McCarthy, and the U.S. Senate officially censured or reprimanded him for misconduct. McCarthy faded away as a disgraced man, and the witch hunts died off.